All right. Hello, everyone. It's time for your NBN spoilers, but I feel like I had to make a video that did more than just show spoilers. But for those of you who are just here for the spoilers, no worries. There's my very next slide. For those of you that want to actually talk about card evaluation, hopefully I can teach you a couple things, or you can teach me a couple of things about card evaluation. I'm also doing daily cast streams every day at 5:30 Eastern Time for the rest of spoiler season, and hope to do a lot more stuff post spoiler season. So please do like and subscribe. Ring the bell, all that YouTube jazz. Having more people means I get to get more feedback and make better stuff and make more things people like. So please consider following and letting me know. But anyway, without further ado, we've got the cards. We've got Cjhoscion, a 0 res asset. You can advance this asset. It is an ambush. When the runner accesses this asset while it's installed, give them 1 tag plus 1 tag for each hosted advancement counter. 0 to trash. It is 2 influence, and its flavor text is the only thing that changes is the uniform. Next up, we've got Mestiniches Hestovo. I'm going to pause this recording and get the pronunciation right. Oh no. I have to do that all over again. Mestnichevsto, a 5 to res 4 strength code gate that has the text: you may advance this ice. When the runner encounters this ice, you may remove 1 hosted advancement counter. If you do, the runner loses 3 credits. Then it has 2 subroutines: the runner loses 3 credits and end the run. These are merely symbols. It's our fear which gives them power. Or their fear. No, it's our fear which gives them power. Excuse me. Flavor text and English. Then the final card is a 2-cost operation, Backroom Machinations, Operation Grey Ops. As an additional cost to play this operation, remove 1 tag. Add this operation to your score area as an agenda worth 1 point. Recording devices at the door, please. Alright, so for those of you who are here for just the cards, thank you so much. And I think these were interesting cards. Not all fantastic cards, but interesting cards. And then for the rest of you, let's go into sort of how I look at cards and how we can talk through some of these cards. Apologies for the text font thing. I wanted to make the background a bit more transparent, but Google Slides is fighting me today. So the key questions for the card is, what does this card do? And when I say what does this card do, I mean, how does it help me win the game or not lose the game? And the 2 questions you should ask yourself is, what is the worst case for this card and what is the best case for this card? And that's kind of subsets of that what does this card actually do question. And then also what support exists and what alternatives are there for what we're trying to do. So we're going to go through the cards more or less one at a time and try and ask all of these questions. So Cjhoscion, what does it do? Well, it's a hard card to think of. Like, a lot of corp cards I think actually are somewhat like difficult to evaluate in the abstract, because this card does nothing. It does nothing until the runner accesses it while it is installed. And so we need to make that value, and then when they access it, if we haven't advanced it, it gives them a single tag. So we've traded a click for a click and a tag on the runner. That's actually not a bad trade, especially because it costs us as the corp nothing beyond that first click. And if we're Provdevost, the NBN ID that was spoiled earlier in the week, we get to put an extra advancement counter when the run is declared successful, and the runner has no chance to jack out after we've advanced this card. So in Provdevost, this is always going to be 2 tags. So now we're saying, oh, it's a click for us and 2 tags for the runner, which is pretty nice. That said, this card has been seen before in the form of Ghost Branch. Wasn't played a lot as Ghost Branch. Now the text is slightly different, so there's reasons this would be different. But one reason is this card doesn't do a lot when it fails to fire. So its worst case is not particularly good, because we have spent a card slot in our deck and in this case is a 0 to trash card slot, which is generally among the most tricky spots to find space for in a corp deck. And we spent an action and a card draw on this. And so then we say, okay, well, his bad case is pretty bad, but often runners do have to run our stuff. So what if we just think about its best case? Well, its best case starts involving a lot of resources for us. So the best case, obviously, is the runner runs this last click and takes enough tags that we can land some punishment on them. But what if the runner accesses, how easy is it to access that best case? And it's not that easy. When we think about it, when we look at what we say, okay, well, what support is out there? We've got Provdavost. And that's it. So until other support comes along, this is a card in Provdavost, and maybe you can make a shell game Provdavost, where you've got Cjhoscion, and you've got Ubiquitous Vig, and so you can install Advanced Cjhoscion and install Advanced Ubiquitous Vig, and the owner has to decide, am I going to let you have a credit, or am I going to run it and potentially take 2 tags? And that might be something, but it's a little bit hard to think about exactly where you end up slotting this card. That said, the shell game situation does seem like the situation where you do it. And the thing about it there is you're going to want to make sure that you force the runner to run late enough in the turn, or that there's enough counters on this card that you really get a good payoff, and the runner spends many more resources than you did with this card. Let's go on to Backroom Machinations. This is a little bit of a different story, right? When we say, what does this card do? Well, it's actually super clear what this card does. It gets us an agenda point. What do we have to do? Well, we have to stick a tag for a turn. Now, that's something that's pretty uncommon and standard at the moment. The power of single tag punishment has gone down. Runners' willingness to take that single tag punishment hasn't changed immensely, and we haven't seen a ton of other tag generating cards, though Cjhoscion obviously is one of them. So the best case for this is actually quite high, right? If we have scored 6 points, we now have points in our deck in the form of Backroom Machinations that are unstealable by the runner and strictly points for us as the corp. So that's a really nice best case. What's the downside, or the worst case? Well, the worst case here is that we have a card that we're never going to get to play in our entire deck, because the runner has tech or cards or more econ than us, and so we can just never land a tag on our turn. That's actually not a terrible case if this card is 1 of in our deck, or maybe a 2 of in our deck, and we just plan to discard 1 of them and we're only ever going to play 1. I don't think this card is the most powerful card in the list, but it has a lot of support cards in the pool. There's a lot of tagging cards in NBN. There's a lot of econ advantage generating cards in NBN. So the opportunity cost for running this card in a deck that already wants to get to 6 points is very low. But if our deck doesn't get to 6 points very reliably, if it gets to 5 and scores out from there, or if it gets to 4 and then scores a 5-3, this card is really doesn't have much of a purpose for us, because it's getting us our 8th point rather than our 7th. So that's sort of the floor and ceiling for these. So when we think about support cards for this, we're looking at decks, especially stuff like Reality Plus, which already wants to be generating us tags, and then also lets us run an agenda suite that's just 6 5-3s. So we'll be scoring 2 of them. The runner can steal 2 of them, and then we can still play this Backroom Machinations, and there will only be 2 agendas left in the entire deck, and we don't have to score either of them, and the runner has to find 1 of them. So that's the really potential upside. So when we compare these 2 cards, we can think about, yeah, Cjhoscion gets a bunch of support in the new cards that are released, but it's not clear exactly how we make the runner run it. And when they do run it, it's still not entirely clear how we punish them, as long as they're playing uh, with the idea that Cjhoscion is in the card pool. But if the runner knows that Backroom Machinations is in the card pool, or even in the deck, there's so many ways to generate tags in NBN, you might be able to force this through. And it fits into an existing archetype that has been strong for quite a while in Netrunner. So, when we comparing two cards, especially cards that function so differently, it's not great to say, oh yeah, this card is stronger than this card. And I think trying to simply say in every case, oh yeah, A is greater than B, is not super informative. Now, that's a little hypocritical coming from a guy who made Trash or Busto, which is literally which of these two cards is stronger. But I think it's part of why you should take all those ratings as a grain of salt, and why I wanted to make it be aggregates of lots of these judgments. I think I'm more likely to see Backroom Machinations in a lot of situations, but there's going to be decks that really want the effect of Cjhoscion. And so when you're looking at these cards, yes, you can say, oh, this is a 3 out of 10 or something like that. Or, if we're thinking in terms of Trash or Busto, oh, this is a below average ELO card. But we can think about situations where those cards are really good. And maybe one day I'll do a video essay on all of the cards I think are misrated and why I think they're misrated in Trash or Busto. And often it's because there are cards that are situationally really, really strong. And Cjhoscion, probably, while not a card I expect to ever end up being very, very strong, we could be wrong. We could be a motion away from suddenly Cjhoscion starting to look pretty reasonable. So, keep an eye out for both of these cards. I think you will see Backroom Machinations enabling some interesting stuff that's a little bit different from Exchange of Information. Its closest counterpart is just rotating out of Standard with the release of Midnight Sun. All right, we should also talk about the ice. And this is one of the ones where we can actually talk about what alternatives are there. And ice and icebreakers are the most common thing where this is actually what determines whether the card gets played or not. Because at the end of the day, you want your ice or your icebreakers to do a very specific thing, and there's a bunch of variations on a theme, and one of them is best for you. And it doesn't matter to some extent some of the other things, like what's the best case or the worst case. It doesn't matter quite as much when what you're really trying to do is say, what is the best of my available options? There's no card in the game in Standard, come Midnight Sun, that does what Backroom Machinations does. There's maybe one or two other cards that does something similar to Cjhoscion. But there are a lot of ice cards printed, and so we need to try and come up with some other scheme to evaluate it. And so the idea is we want to compare what the alternatives are. Here I'm just looking at the code gates in NBN, because often you want to be comparing ice of the same type in the same faction. Not always. There's many reasons you want to do this, but I also don't want this video to be 30 minutes long. So when we compare Mestnichevesto to Tollbooth, they're actually very clearly are hearkening. Mestnichevesto is hearkening to Tollbooth in that it has a on encounter the runner loses 3. However, Mestnichevesto is 1 strength weaker, but 3 credits cheaper to res. That seems like a slam dunk win, until you remember that you have to spend an extra click and an extra credit to get Mestnichevesto to get that counter most of the time. So that actually ends up being effectively the same res cost as Tollbooth, but you don't get the permanent ability of Tollbooth, so you have to keep re-advancing it. And so outside of Proftivost, this ice probably doesn't look super enticing. The exception is maybe something like Built to Last, where, hey, click for 2 credits to then make the runner lose 3 credits. Maybe that's something you could look at in Built to Last. But Mestnichevesto probably only really works in Proftivost. And maybe there, it's not an ice you still want, because you want to be putting your advanceable counters on Cjhoscions. But Conversely, of course, if you're on a Proftivos consulting deck that's looking more at those 5/3s and then wants to square out with Backroom Machinations, advancing a Mest and Cjhoscion is a great way to guarantee creating a credit advantage versus the runner. On the end here, we have Funhouse, which is sort of the counter argument to what I just said, where this is forcing the runner to spend a lot of resources on dealing with and handling tags. You know, if we're trying to land that Backroom Machinations, the runner having to handle 2 tags whenever they encounter a Funhouse is a big deal. One when they encounter and one from the subroutine, just to be clear. So, you know, it's a bit of a, you know, when you sit down to deck build and you say, okay, I want a medium to high res code gate in my list because I'm going to have lots of economy. I'm going to be looking to grind out the runner. I have these 3 options in NBN, and which one do I want the most? So the advantages of Mest and Cjhoscion are mostly if the runner runs it and you hit them with both the encounter effect and the first subroutine, you're rezzing for 5 and the runner is losing 6. That is a enormous swing, and you have an end the run left on the ice. Conversely, Tollbooth is more expensive in res cost, but less expensive in terms of resources, which are clicks for credits or ID triggers for Proftivos. And then you have Funhouse, which leans directly into NBN's kind of tagging strategy. So this has lots of value for decks that are really trying to get the runner to go into the tag me state very directly, rather than relying on creating a credit advantage and playing a card like hard-hitting news. So I don't have strict evaluations about in which case you always run what, but hopefully this is some decent framework to start thinking about evaluating the cards, and I'll go a little bit more in depth on where I think certain cards stand when I actually go and try and build some archetype videos, which is what my final slide is about. So first, everyone, thanks for watching. I'm going to be streaming every day, 5:30 Eastern Time, 5:30 p.m., for the rest of the spoiler season, so up through next Thursday or Friday. And then my goal is to try and make a video covering a few of the ideas that I think we'll see for each faction. I suspect that's going to be about a video a week, so I may never finish that series as we start looking more and more at Continentals, which are really right around the corner at the end of August. But if there's things you want to talk about in particular, if you really think if it's worth me doing another startup standard transition video, please let me know in the comments, and like and subscribe. And thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoy the rest of spoiler season. Keep an eye on this channel till later in the spoiler season. I've managed to sneak one extra spoiler in by convincing a champ to come on stream and do a record reconstructor and talk about their champ card. So I'll see you early next week.